I'm Beth Robb, and I am the chair of the Women to Women Steering Committee. And I want to welcome everyone to the Spring Forum. We are excited to see so many of you. I see new names and faces on the list. And I know that I and others reached out to some of our friends in our various circles. So we're grateful that you're joining us. And we hope that this isn't a one-time thing. We hope this is a multiple time thing, that you find value in the Women to Women Giving Circle and the forums and other events that we have as we come together as women in our community. So welcome. I just want to recap briefly. Last year in 2020, when the COVID-19 crisis began, Women to Women responded with a decision to donate $10,000 to the larger Illinois Prairie Community Foundation's drive to feed the hungry in our community. And we also, as a steering committee, decided that we would revisit our policy on distribution of gifts. And we were able to increase the grant amounts that we gave this year to organizations that have been responding to people in our community as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. We made total gifts of grants of $40,000. And if you read the spring newsletter that I hope many of you received, either in the mail or online, it's a beautifully designed newsletter. Thank you to Pat Grogg and Barb Meeks and Michelle Evans for the efforts in getting that out. But if you read your newsletter, you'll see who the recipients of those grants were and read some information about how impactful those grants have been for this year. As we maneuver through this crisis, Women to Women has featured women and organizations in our communities who've been doing the hard work, the frontline work. Last summer, we featured some information on folks on how Unit 5 reacted and responded to feed children who normally receive their breakfast and lunch and sometimes dinners from their schools. We also learned how the Midwest Food Bank responds both locally and more globally to disasters and to the COVID-19 crisis. We learned how the Home Sweet Home mission houses the homeless in our community. And at the Fall Forum, we featured Dana Williamson from Ounce of Prevention, and she spoke about how we can build resilience in families as they respond to work, life, and to school, and all the other stressors in our lives as a result of the crisis. We are fortunate today to have Dr. Doris Houston and Dr. Danita Brown Young. And we want to focus on the future and how we move forward. And thus the title of our program today, which is Renewal and Recovery, the Future After COVID-19. Dr. Doris Houston, who is a new member of our steering committee, she was named Interim Assistant to the President for Diversity and Inclusion at ISU in July. She's the first to hold this inaugural cabinet level position, which was established by ISU President Larry Dietz. In her role, she is to provide direction and leadership to the university's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And she chairs the President's Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Council. Her role also extends to the community and includes engaging with stakeholders at the local, statewide, and national levels to advance social justice efforts. Prior to joining the Office of the President, Dr. Houston served 15 years as a faculty member in the School of Social Work, where she was appointed interim director from 2018 to 2020. During this time, she initiated the school's first faculty-student anti-racist forum, and she continues to serve as principal investigator for the state of Illinois' Child Welfare Racial Equity Initiative, which began as a partnership with Department of Children and Family Services in 2007. She attended the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign for her undergraduate and graduate studies, and was the first African American to receive a master's and doctorate in human development and family studies from UIUC. In 2018, she was named the recipient of the ISU David A. Strand Diversity Achievement Award, and in 2020, she was honored with the McLean County YWCA Women of Distinction. In addition to serving as a member of our steering committee, she is a member of the Central Illinois chapter of the Lynx and the McLean County NAACP. Dr. Danita Brown Young was named the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana in 2017 and continues in that role to the present. She received her PhD from the Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, an MA in Community Counseling from Loyola University of Chicago, and her BA in Sociology with a minor in Psychology from Kent State in Kent, Ohio. In her role as the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, she provides vision, executive leadership, oversight, and direction for student affairs and student services. She assists with the retention and recruitment of students, has created transformative learning opportunities to prepare students to be successful in a global society. She provides and plays a vital role in creating and maintaining a healthy campus environment and student wellness through services, programs, and innovative learning experiences beyond the classroom, while encouraging a sense of community among students, faculty, and staff. She has assisted in managing a budget of approximately $200 million annually and provides oversight to more than 1,200 full-time staff members and 3,200 student employees, and serves as a key member of the Chancellor's leadership team. She has been involved for over 20 years in experiences and working environments in student affairs with increasingly complex senior level administrative positions, extensive involvement in strategic planning, assessment and goal setting, resource allocation, fundraising, student conduct, crisis management, and staff supervision. So I think we have two tremendously talented and experienced women today to talk about our forum topic, which is renewal and recovery moving forward in the age post-COVID. So with no further ado, I'd like to ask Dr. Houston and Dr. Brown Young to begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Rob. I appreciate your kind and gracious words. And I don't know about each of you, but I am ready for some renewal and some springtime recovery. So I was just thrilled when our group suggested that we have this as the focus. This year has no doubt created once-in-a-lifetime challenges for all of us. There is not one aspect of life that hasn't been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our work life, our family life and relationships, schooling, and the tremendous pressure for those who are parenting. The pandemic has also uncovered a host of systemic disparities, particularly faced by women, people of color, medically compromised people, and individuals from low-income communities, as well as our first responders. The mental health stressors are real, And while the health disparities and the tragic losses of life has made us all feel quite helpless, yet in the midst of our fear, our pain, our loss and discomfort, hope can prevail. This spring forum brings us together to turn our hearts and our minds toward renewal and recovery, the future after COVID-19. And I am thrilled to talk with our featured guest, Dr. Danita Brown Young, Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Danita comes to us today with a vision of hope, and our discussion will provide us with ideas to think about as we prepare to pivot from the age of COVID to a future of hope, new opportunities, new ways of thinking, and renewal. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Danita Brown Young. Let's give her all a virtual hand.
Well, thank you so much, Doris, Beth, Michelle, the Women to Women group, for inviting me to discuss this important topic. And thank you to all of the attendees. I know this is a very busy time and season for many of you, but I thank you for taking some time out today to kind of join us in this discussion. But Doris, before we get started in answering questions, I want to give some context, because you see, we know that while most people's lives and work have been negatively impacted and affected by this crisis, there was some analysis done by the McKinsey Global Institute that shows that overall women's jobs and livelihoods are more vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic, which is really not a surprise. We kind of know that. But I mean, the magnitude of the inequality is very striking. They use data and trends from unemployment surveys in the United States and India, where gender disaggregated data was available. They estimated that female job loss rates due to COVID-19 were about 1.8 times higher than male job loss rates globally, at 5.7% versus 3.1% respectively. But now let's drill down a little bit just to the United States. Women made up 46% of workers before COVID-19. Factoring in industry mix effects suggests that women would make up 43% of the job losses. However, unemployment data indicate that women make up 54% of the overall job losses to date. Their analysis finds that the gendered nature of work across industries explains 1/4 of the difference between job loss rates for men and women. The lack of systemic progress to resolve other societal barriers for women explains the rest, which I know we will discuss a little bit later. But the nature of work remains significantly gender specific. Women and men tend to cluster in different occupations in both nature and our different economies. So this, in turn, it shapes the gender implications of this pandemic. When you look at the McKinsey analysis, it shows that female jobs are 19% more at risk than male ones, simply because women are disproportionately represented in sectors negatively affected by the COVID-19 crisis. They estimate that 4.5% of women's employment is at risk in the pandemic globally, compared with 3.8% of men's employment, just given the industries that men and women participate in. It shows that their research, women have more than the average share of employment in 3 of the 4 most affected sectors, as measured by employment declines globally. When you look at the women in global employment, 39%, but women have 54% of global jobs in accommodation and food service, which was greatly impacted because most people weren't traveling anymore. Everything was shut down. As we know, that's one of the worst impacted sectors from this crisis. 43% of the jobs in retail and wholesale trade were lost. 46% in other services, including the arts, recreation, public administration. Some sectors such as manufacturing, in which men are a larger majority of those employed in that area, have been affected as well. But other sectors such as education and healthcare, where women are the majority, have suffered relatively little impact. And according to another study done by the McKinsey Institute, 1 in 4 women are considering leaving the workforce or downshifting their careers versus 1 in 5 men. While nearly all women have been impacted, 3 major groups have experienced some of the largest challenges. That is the working mothers, women in senior management positions, and Black women. And this disparity comes across as particularly stark with parents of kids under 10. The rate in which the group, women in this group were considering leaving was 10% higher than men. And women in heterosexual dual career couples who have children also reported larger increases in their time spent on household responsibilities since the pandemic began. So as you can see, women are already behind and at a disadvantage before the pandemic. And we've had to make some extremely tough decisions, particularly when it comes to the personal and the professional decisions that are impacting our lives. Thank you.
Danita, thank you for providing us with that overview. And it really does speak to the fact that women have suffered a tremendous amount, whether it be that in the workforce, be that with the additional responsibilities related to family life, trying to keep a household running, trying to budget with oftentimes less income. When I think of those food lines that we've seen, and how many times, although certainly there's both all genders and gender identities have been represented, but we really do see women oftentimes, because of those loss of jobs, being on the forefront of having to try to make ends meet. The New York Times published an article entitled "How Society Has Turned Its Back on Mothers." And in that article, there's a psychiatrist who was a co-author of the piece that stated mothers are faced with impossible choices: sending their children to school and risking viral exposure, not showing up to work, or plopping their children down in front of a TV screen just to get some peace. We can't underestimate the tremendous mental health toll, particularly on women. And some are saying that it really is a level of societal betrayal. So I'd like to ask you, has society turned its backs on mothers, and has this pandemic uncovered such factors?
Well, I would say in a sense, yes. I think society has turned its back on mothers and children. I think the United States has kind of stepped away from the traditional values and into looking at economic and social policies, and have put mothers in no-win situations. Mothers have been, and women and particularly, have been forced to divide their time in so many ways that it's nearly impossible to find any sort of like work-life integration, let alone time for themselves. And notice I didn't say work-life balance, because nothing in our lives is ever going to be equal. So I don't really particularly care to use the term balance, because it just, at least I have never experienced that. I don't know, maybe you all have, but we do have to learn how to integrate and prioritize. But I know as moms, we are struggling just to keep it all together. We are struggling to prioritize. We are struggling just to breathe, to make it every day. And I know that some of you on this call, on this Zoom call, absolutely know what I'm talking about. There are times when I struggle just to breathe, just to even have a moment. And I know that I'm in a better position than most women and moms. But there are times I know that I often have mom guilt, wife guilt, work guilt, you name it, guilt. And there are times that I just want to take a little break or give my husband and parents a break and So I am guilty because I will sometimes put my little daughter, who you probably hear running around upstairs, I will sit her down, and she's 2, and she likes to watch Coco Melons. I put her down and she's watching YouTube and Coco Melon. That keeps her, focused, but she's also learning at the same time. So I'm okay with it. But, we as moms are overscheduled. We schedule to the max. We're always thinking about how to, really support our kids. And when you were talking about spending quality time with our children and our families, but it's oftentimes at the cost of our own personal well-being. And so I think, society hasn't given ourselves grace, and we haven't given ourselves grace. And all of the stress and the pressures have definitely taken a toll on our mental, our physical health. And we've got to stop doing that. We often are put into situations where we're talking about how we should be doing this, how we should be doing that, but we really have to come to the fruition that we've got to start prioritizing so that we're not feeling so overburdened, so pressured with work. But I know it's difficult because there are work demands and there are choices that we had to make when we had to kind of pivot with this pandemic, that, we had to be at home. We had to still carry on work duties. We had to play educator, lunchroom monitor, counselor, everything all at once. And it felt like society and our employers were not listening to us, and not listening to how this was having an impact on not only the women, but also children in their learning, in their health as well. And so I think, it is time for that sense of renewal and recovery to start making some change, so that we can have better investments into people in the development and support of people.
I appreciate you stating that, Danita, that we really do have to invest in people. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on, due to the fact that we have endured such suffering, what lessons can be learned moving forward? And if you have any advice for other working women and mothers who are really trying to keep all of the spinning plates in the air at one time.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, for me, I'm a Christian and I'm a praying woman. So I have to stay prayed up. That's for me. And I have been learning to give myself some grace, which I have not always done. And it's certainly not easy. And, I tell people all the time, we've got to start, as a society, start to give grace to people. Don't even get me started about this cancel culture. That's a whole different topic, right? Somebody makes a mistake, we want to cancel them out instead of trying to help them learn and educate. We just cancel them out. But instead of giving some grace, something that I know that I have been fortunate enough in my household, I live in a multi-generational household. And so I've always been brought up in terms of a team. Family is a team, we're supporting each other. And in my house, that's exactly what we are. I have been extremely blessed to have my family here. My parents moved here in 2018 when my husband and I had our first child. My husband has a visual impairment, so he cannot drive. So my parents, moved from Ohio to come up here to help us with schedule and workload and trying to help take care of Sarah, that's our daughter, because they know that my schedule is a little crazy. And so is, my husband. He has multiple jobs. He works for Social Security, but he also is an assistant minister as well. But, I know that I'm in a different situation, again, than other people who I have that support, that I have people that I know I can depend on. And I'm not saying that it's always easy, because we definitely have our challenges, just like every home and every family. But we try to approach it as a team approach. And I try not to let the little things bother me. Who cares if the dishes aren't put away when I want them to be put away? Or, it's not really a big deal that the drawers aren't organized. Who cares? Who's really looking in your drawers, right? So you just got to kind of let some of those little things go to relieve some of that space. But I would also say it's okay sometimes to let your guard down as a mother. Sometimes we have to become vulnerable and we have to ask for help, which is not easy to ask for help. We know that life is tough, but please know that you don't have to go at it alone. And, I would tell women, even if you don't have family members who can pitch in, try to find some support networks, some friends to help make life more manageable. Even if there's people on your job or in your neighborhood or connections with your kids, their friends, their parents, try to build some sort of a village to help get through this pandemic and beyond. And trust me, there are others who are feeling the same as you are, so you're not alone. So I think it is important to create some sort of a support group or join some sort of support group. I know I have a group of friends, I call my crew, they're very supportive. I can relax with them. Most of them are mothers too. And so we swap stories and come up with strategies. But you have to also pay attention to your mental health and self-care. I know for years, I have neglected my own self, my own personal well-being. But, there are times when I have gone to counseling. And, more recently, I started a small healthy group of women, other women who are in my profession, and we encourage and motivate each other to take care of our health. We set weight loss goals, movement goals, food, water, intake goals, sleep and rest goals. We have to make sleep and rest a priority. And just really trying to, again, make it from day to day and look beyond and have that vision. And so we check in with each other every day. I say all this because I think we as women don't invest enough time into us and taking care of ourselves. So whatever it is that's going to help you through it, whether that's prayer, meditation, exercising, going for a walk. The weather's been so nice lately, except for today, it's been raining. Listening to music, reading, watching TV, then just do it. And adopting that positive mindset to deal with some of these battles, because it is definitely a battle. But, we know that each day it brings new opportunities to kind of rethink decisions and new choices. And, again, give yourself some grace. And whether you're making big or small steps, at least you're making steps and you're moving ahead. And you're doing the best that you can do to take care of you and your family. And just adopt that positive mindset.
I love that piece of advice, to just do it. Certainly, this pandemic has shown us that tomorrow is not always promised, and we have to create our joy. We have to create our sense of peace where we are. And, in American society in particular, we've really gotten away from relying on each other. I appreciated you sharing your story about being in a 3-generational household and how important that has been and how helpful that has been, that you've been able to rely on your parents and vice versa. And I wonder if really if this pandemic has really gotten us back to that, to know that it's okay and that we should, even if it's not biological family, but that we can have that sense of family and community and village with each other, and that it is okay to ask for help. I'm going to ask the audience, if you could, as we have this dialogue, just think through or maybe jot down some notes or even put in the chat, what are some of the things that you do to create that sense of community and social support for yourself? These are the things that have really, in talking with people in my own life, helped to help us weather this storm. If we could move on now to talk about education and schooling, certainly that is your area of specialty, and a little scenario. There was a Bloomington teacher that reported that their children in their classroom were increasingly unreachable via Zoom, either signed off or just not tuning in, and some who were signing on that were just in tears, being forced to sit at a screen all day. And young children are missing out on important socialization opportunities. One dad reported in a New York Times article that no one wants to be here. He said his kids told him, "Can I log off now?" So it's really a challenge to have, we're trying to keep our students moving forward with their education, but at what cost? It really is a social and emotional cost. So as we look to the future over the next 3 to 6 months, as we're getting our vaccinations and hopefully we can begin to open up, but what bold steps can educators take to ensure that our children have the opportunity to thrive educationally, socially, and emotionally?
Well, first of all, hearing those stories just breaks my heart. And my heart goes out to all of the students and the teachers from K through college, but particularly our K through 12 students and educators. And it does break my heart to see these little elementary school age kids struggling to connect, to learn, to grow. I have seen where a kindergartner was logging on. And I mean, just think back. Can you imagine going through kindergarten online? Like, that's not what that is about. Like, how do you grow and develop and become socialized? So I think, as we are making steps to make our schools safer, with the vaccinations, with the cleaning, with the testing that many of our schools are creating, colleges are creating to help the community, we do have to recognize that there are going to be some severe impacts from this last year and a half. And, as educators, we have to continuously speak out to our legislators, speak out to, those who can, again, help invest into our communities and invest into our school situations and nonprofit organizations that are local, because again, we're going to have to deal with some of these challenges, such as the impeded learning. But let me back up. There's some basic needs for our students and our educators that are not being met. We've got a lot of food insecurity, clothing, shelter. People lost their jobs, and so yes, when our students are trying to learn by remote, some of them didn't even have the technology. They didn't have access to a Chromebook, a laptop, or a smartphone or mobile hotspots. And I know, depending on what community you were on, it was a struggle to even get those items so that you could learn, so that you could have access to learning. I know we were fortunate enough that we had a program here in Champaign, Urbana, that we were able to distribute laptops and mobile hotspots to individuals who need it. But we're going to have to take a step back as these students start to come back into the classroom. They're going to have to start doing some diagnostic tests just to see where students are, because we know that they are going to find, and we're going to have to come up with some individual learning plans for them to make up for those interruptions. We're also going to have to make sure that we are dealing with a lot of that mental health and the stress, the social development that has been missing. It's hard to build friendships through a computer. It's just not as natural. And so we're going to have to spend a lot of time helping students understand how to build relationships, how to build friendships, particularly with young kids, or how to really truly be in a structured environment. I don't know how some of these schools are doing it. I hear the variety in different schedules. Sometimes people are in 2 days a week, sometimes they're off, sometimes by the last name. I don't know how they even keep it straight. But we really have to be urgent about the relief that we are giving to our schools. We have to make sure that we are putting those extra investments in to rebuild people, to rebuild school, to rebuild the support resources for each student, for each educator. And it's going to take some time, but also giving some extra skills to our educators about how do you support the students, how do you support the families, during this time. And we're just going to have to rethink the learning schedule. There's no way that we can go back into the previous learning schedules for schools. They're really going to have to figure out maybe even shorter periods for learning. I'm not exactly sure, but we're going to have to, we cannot just take what we did prior to COVID-19 and just restart it in the fall. There's going to have to be a complete overhaul of what that educational system looks like.
I completely agree, Danita. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, because there's been a loss of learning over the past 12 months, actually even more than that. Should we be looking at models of year-round schooling to help our children catch up? What are your thoughts on that?
I struggle with that question sometimes, because I think there are some benefits and some pluses to year-round school models. Like, again, there's a reduction of learning loss over summer, so that it's continuous learning. There's no need to have an additional summer school. You could figure out a way to evenly distribute some of the breaks that we have, or to give some vacation, because you absolutely need a break. I think the issues of childcare and consistent year-round childcare could be resolved by making sure that school is in session 12 months of the year. And really could allow for some multi-track systems to really maximize the school. And it could make the educational profession more year-round and more robust. But I think there are also some drawbacks to that, because I think to implement some sort of a new schedule, the initial costs are going to be very high. I think there are going to be higher operating costs in the summer. Most of our schools don't even have air conditioning. So it might need to be installed if you really want to have a learning process throughout the summer. We know it could impact our teens who are looking for summer jobs. They may not be able to hold a summer job to save money to help, with family costs. If you have siblings in different schools, it could be on different multi-track schedules. Students will not be able to have opportunities, I think, to attend the summer sports camps or the summer enrichment camps that are specialized. And to be honest, I think a big hindrance or stumbling block could be the challenge to pay teachers, even though teachers need to be paid more now, right? We already know that. Just on the 9-month schedule, we know that teachers need, they need a lot more than what they already currently make. And I really hope, when the schools are passing these levies in the districts, and they really take a look at the teachers' pay, because, and I don't ever want to hear people say, oh, those teachers make too much. No, they don't make enough. They don't make enough, not at all. But, I think another drawback would be, adults and the students, they absolutely do need significant breaks. So I think, when you're looking at all of these factors, they should be taken into account if you're going to look into a year-round model. Also considering the mental health of the students, the teachers, the families. Again, I think it could have some benefits and some pluses, but it could also have some added stressors as well. And we know that change is never easy. So if you're going to make that fundamental change to an education system, please know that, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some work. And we know that the state needs to look at that, and each school is unique. Each district is unique. And it's going to take a considerable amount of resources to make that happen. So like I said, it's a really tough decision to make.
Sure. And you're right, change is never easy, but I tell you that the one lesson that I've learned through COVID is when change is necessary, we can make it happen. Look how quickly we changed some of the rules about schooling and online engagement and workshops and work scheduling, and even for higher education, that we were able to bypass some of the standardized testing that previously was considered something that had to be a requirement. And we made those changes. Really, yes. We just turned on a dime, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
It does make me wonder, can we go back, or are we now at a place where we have to say, well, you know, if we made those changes due to COVID, why can't we be more flexible as we move out of COVID?
Oh, I think absolutely we need to be more flexible. And I'm not sure that what we were doing before COVID was truly working. When you were thinking about the impact of learning, the disparities. I mean, I think in the gender gaps, the racial gaps of learning, I think this is a time to really capture that audience. Like you said, we made all these changes in a matter of days, really, when you think about it. And so let's spend some time to get it right, to shorten and narrow the gap, to eliminate the gaps that we have in the disparities of learning, to make sure that, you know, we are investing in our future, in our students and in our families, to help our students. So I'm not sure if we want to go back to that older system. Maybe there were some benefits and positives that we carry over, but overall, this is a time to have a fresh start.
I like that. Let's get our audience involved as we move on to a few more questions. But in the meantime, maybe in the chat, those of you who choose, if you could include what changes were made during COVID that you might want to see us keep around or even modify in some fashion. What actually has been some things that you've appreciated about these changes? And while you do that, just going back to the question that we asked earlier about what we do for self-care and community building, I'll read a few here. Someone mentioned, Peggy mentioned Zumba classes via Zoom. I love it.
Yeah.
Journaling, baking cakes, banana bread, sounds yummy, and other things from scratch. Okay, and sharing with the neighbors. That's wonderful.
I would absolutely agree with everything in here that people are saying, and I think it's true. There are so many folks who have said, I never cooked a day in my life, but with this pandemic, it pushed them to go out and research different recipes and learn how to cook. And now, you know, they're like, I don't think I ever really truly want to go back to going out to restaurants like they always did or eating out, because they're eating healthier. They're trying, you know, some of the entities like the HelloFresh and the Cook Chef, and or just paying attention to, you know, what they're buying at the grocery store, because they had to budget as well. They had to learn how to budget. I took a pay cut. We took pay cuts at the U of I, some administrators. And so that meant, you know, my budget had to shift too. And so that means everybody in this household, we had to budget. So, I mean, there are some, I always tell our family, you know, because I pretty much, you know, handle the budget. I'm like, is this a luxury or a necessity? And, you know, those are some of the things that we have to think about before we go off and just start to spend. And I think, you know, when we're talking about investing into people and the families, providing more resources like that. You know, how do you become financially savvy? How do you budget? There are a lot of people who don't understand budgeting, that don't understand finances, or how do you make meals stretch? And I am very happy that our U of I Extension office, they offer free workshops on all of these topics. You know, they have a site that talks about how do you menu plan, how do you make these meals that are nutritious and filling for your family, how do you get by on a budget? Those are some of the items that I think that we have got to start promoting within our school system, and understand that not everybody has access again to online. So, how do we get back to that whole, verbal face-to-face, good old paper, maybe? And I don't like a lot of paper, but realize that we have to make sure it's accessible to everybody.
And you've planted some seeds there. Part of the work of the Women to Women's Giving Circle is to think about ways that we can support nonprofit organizations and small businesses to be able to support our community. And just those ideas that you shared, similar to Extension, to give workshops on budgeting and cooking and things like that, are definitely some things that can be very helpful. I've heard a lot of people talk more about growing their own fruits and vegetables, and you don't have to have a huge farm to do that. There's a lot of folks that are doing the smaller container gardens, and just to be able to have some, to kind of go back to nature, have some self-sustaining nutrition as well. When we think about the role of our federal, state, and local governments and nonprofit organizations, do you think, do you think there could be some new roles or some areas that we really need to address beyond COVID? Like you said, I don't think we can go back, but what are some new needs, some new challenges, and what might be some things that we want to ask our legislative leaders and community leaders to address?
I think there's so many realities of injustices that occur on our jobs, in the community. And I think this is a time for those federal, state, and local representatives to become even more invested into, if you really care about this country, if you care about the citizens of your state, you care about the citizens of your local community, and hats off to those who are definitely invested already. I'm not saying that there are representatives who are not doing their job, because they certainly are, and they're put in some tough situations because, money doesn't just grow on trees, right? So we recognize it does take some of those resources, financial resources, to make it happen. We look at some of the policies, when we think about workforce development or career training, what does that look like? How is that accessible? How is that offered and marketed toward our women in particular? Are we taking advantage of some of the great programs that are offered at our local colleges, particularly our community colleges? Even though I work at a 4-year institution, I am a strong proponent and supporter of the community college system. And I don't think we do enough to promote the community college system, and particularly even at the K through 12 level. We always are pushing a 4-year college. Well, not everybody is equipped, nor should they attend a 4-year college. And I think there are some critical programs that our students are missing out on at community college for whatever reason, whether there's a stigma attached or not. But I think we've got to try to change that narrative to help our students go into some of these very noble professions like HVAC or plumbing or electricians. There are often times when we are trying to build a facility here on campus that it slows down in production. Why? Because they don't have enough qualified construction workers or electricians or people who can put the windows in. And so, there are oftentimes people saying, we need jobs. Well, guess what? There are some training programs that are free that will help you go get the skills that you need. Now, with that being said, we need more workforce development, but that means we also need more affordable resources for childcare and family care, because you're going to need somebody to watch your kids. And so are there ways, affordable programs where there can be some childcare and family care options at these workforce development sites, at the community colleges, making sure that there is adequate transportation for individuals, making sure that, you know, our women in particular have better access to healthcare and mental health resources. Again, looking at some of the food insecurity programs and budgeting. So I think there's many areas of where our federal, state, and our local representatives should be looking to really make that change and to make it sustainable and lasting within our communities.
Thank you. Those are all very important ideas and suggestions. Last month, President Biden signed a $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill that does include some of those investments in child care, child tax credits, caregiver deductions, Head Start funding. Are there some things that would be on your wish list to ensure that women, children, and families receive the support, that the holistic support that they need?
Yeah, I kind of touched on a little bit, but for me, I dearly wish that state and our local governments responsibly allocate the funds that we do have based on need in the areas that are most impacted and affected by this prolonged pandemic. You know, research has proven that underserved, underrepresented minorities in low-income areas have been hit the hardest by COVID. You know, the funding to ensure that those citizens have access to gainful employment, like I said, proper nutrition, safe housing, childcare, you know, equal education, that would be a wonderful start in that healing process, particularly to those who have been devastated by the economic blows that COVID did, that, you know, put a plate upon us. And I really think that on my wish list, I would say we need greater assistance for family and children's programs in our organizations in the local area. You know, oftentimes these programs are the beacon of safety, support, and hope for those in our community. And they are more than often, they're not funded well. They're underfunded, they're understaffed. But these organizations are a lifeblood to our community and really should be considered essential to the well-being of our citizens. And when I think of places like our, like we have a Boys and Girls Club here in Champaign, and I think about those places because it does provide safe, secure learning environments for kids. We also know that during this pandemic, and particularly early on, because we were in closed container, you know, situations in home, people were stressed out, people didn't have any money. We know that domestic violence calls spiked, okay? And so we have to pay attention to that. And so it was difficult for, obviously, the kids to get out to these secure, safe learning environments to escape some of some of the domestic violence that might be occurring and happening. But now that we're starting to hopefully turn the corner a little bit more, I do think we're going to see more of a need for places like the Boys and Girls Clubs to provide some safe, secure learning environments, to provide these leadership and service opportunities for our students, to help them with their own educational development, you know, provide some health and wellness for them. But again, it's about helping them create that sense of belonging as well, because they're going to be craving for it. They're going to be craving for that interaction with folks, and they're going to be craving to have some encouraging, supportive relationships with their peers and with adults. And those places, you know, like the Boys and Girls Club, they really do provide some fun, and it can provide some structure and some opportunities for them. So I would say try to invest more into these nonprofit organizations like that as well.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because certainly in addition to ensuring that our children have those learning opportunities, let's talk about the fun. That we can't ignore the importance of fun and friendships and joy, because otherwise, really it's particularly for children, but really for all of us, we need that joy for our own mental health. So I appreciate you, and certainly the Boys and Girls Club and other organizations, even church or faith-based organizations, can really provide those resources. Yeah, I'm going to circle back around. We'd asked earlier about what people, what they might want to keep in place in the wake of COVID. And someone says, I hate wearing masks, but definitely want to continue at large events and at airports. Also Zoom, can we really go back to all face-to-face, having these accessible meetings, maybe a mixture of some things still in Zoom that we can just click on the computer, and other things we've got to get dressed up and leave out. So that'll definitely be interesting to see. Someone says flexible meeting arrangements and minimization of travel, imagining the savings on gasoline, dining out, all of those things. That's true.
All of that. And I think it's going to be hard. I mean, we're already hearing it now as we're trying to prepare to go back to work in fall, right? Some of us have already gone back to the office,
Yeah.
But even some of our faculty and our staff members are hiding behind, well, we just don't know if it's safe yet to go back in the fall. Even though, yes, we know that there are some fears, but we have this testing regimen on campus, we have the vaccinations, and there hasn't been any documented cases of, spread necessarily in the classroom. But I think it's because we have become comfortable working remotely, even though it's been a stressor. But like all of those reasons that were just mentioned, I'm saving on wear and tear of my car. I'm not spending so much on gas. I've learned to cook at home, so I'm not spending money maybe out on lunches all the time and every day. I can multitask. I can be in a meeting and throw a load of clothes in the washer. I can do all of that while I'm at home. And like you said, the meeting times, the flexible meeting times, are helpful. But even in our personal realm, when I think about how I've been able to have like 100% attendance at my sorority meetings and links meetings because it's accessible. And I don't have to worry about, okay, I need an hour to get here, or, that time is not lost in terms of transportation. So I think and even with church, people are like, oh yeah, we need to get back full time. I think it's going to be a hard time getting people truly back into these places, and they're going to look for some sort of hybrid.
So are these, and really these areas are of particular interest, I would say, to women, wouldn't you think? Because oftentimes we're in that role to take care of the household, and when we can cut back a little bit on some of the travel and those kinds of things. So are these some things that we should advocate for, some hybrids when it comes to work schedules, and even someone mentioned here the telemedicine being something that has been an advantage, streaming services for church and faith gatherings as well. Should we advocate to?
Oh yeah, without a doubt, I think we need to advocate for that. That's something I know that we're going to continue here at the U of I. We're going to continue the telehealth. We're going to continue the telemedicine. We've moved into a model where there are some in-person face-to-face appointments, but we certainly are going to keep the telehealth as into the future, because it makes it more accessible. It's more accessible to reach more groups in that manner as well. But yes, I think we should be advocating even for work schedules. I am not advocating for all of our 100% workforce to be back into their offices come fall. We know that many of them have been working on campus anyway because they're in our auxiliary units like our housing, our dining, our union, campus recreation. Those in our health center, they didn't have the opportunity to stay at home. They had to be on campus. So we understand that. But now the other offices are starting to kind of filter back. And I've told them to be creative. If they need to say, okay, we're going to have 25% of the capacity of the office in a rotating basis, maybe these individuals are here on Monday, Wednesday, the next individuals are there on Tuesday, Thursday. Everybody doesn't have to be back in the office 100%. I think we still need to be flexible. We still are going to need to be flexible because we don't know what the K through 12 system is going to bring. We don't know what your child care or your family needs are. So we are going to have to kind of look at these policies and not be so stringent.
Thank you. Another benefit that was mentioned is just spending that time with family and having real talk, being able to slow down enough to listen and engage and be in the same room maybe where before the kids are off to practice or volleyball or whatever the case may be, and we're running around going to all the different meetings, but just having that time together to bond and communicate as a family.
I 100% agree with that. My schedule was so crazy. I was traveling at least twice a month, somewhere, and, obviously that COVID put a halt to that and slowed it down. And I have enjoyed, like you said, being in my house or having the conversation, playing games with the family, playing more games with, my daughter, or, going for a walk, actually having conversations, focused conversations. I think that is all changed for the better for a number of families. And I know people were worried in the beginning of this pandemic. It was, they're like, okay, are we going to see a baby boom? Are we going to see a divorce boom? What are we going to see during this pandemic? But I think it has worked for the most part positively because it's brought families together.
One last question, and then I know Judge Robb would like to open things up for other questions from the audience, but this has to do with STEM. We know that our labor market, the way to the future oftentimes are the STEM fields. Certainly not the only wave of the future, because we still have to have the human touch. There's some things that technology cannot replace. But as we look to the future of growing our economy with STEM, how can we improve access for girls and women who seek professions in the sciences, technology, engineering, and math, right? And then I hear some people, we say STEAM, that includes the arts in there as well. But
and agriculture, yeah.
Agriculture, yeah.
Yeah, we definitely use STEAM, and most of the time we use the A for agriculture because that is such a need where I think more women, and particularly women of color, need to be invested into agriculture. But I think we have to provide our girls with opportunities to engage in STEAM activities early on. And as early on as pre-K, let's not wait until high school, but let's start early on. We need to instill in them early on that science, technology, engineering, agriculture, math are areas that they can really enjoy and make significant contributions when they enter the workforce. I was going to be a secondary education mathematics teacher. I even had my teaching practicum, but when I was doing my teaching practicum, I just saw so many kids that had mental health issues, family issues, that I ended up switching my major to psychology and sociology, and then I went on to get my counseling degree. But I love math, and it's because I was exposed to it early on with my family. And in terms of, You know, I would see them sit down. My parents, every month they sat down and they did the budget. Now that was back in the day where, you know, my mother, she had her system with her checkbooks. You know, most of these people don't even have checks anymore, but she had her checkbook. And this is the time where you had to call on the phone to see what the checks cleared. And so I remember calling on the phone to see what checks had cleared and would highlight which ones in budgeting. And so they had me included in helping budgeting. So they were teaching me how to budget. They were teaching me how to manage. Or my grandfather was a trustee at the church, and I became a junior trustee, and I would help count money after service. And so I just love problem solving. So what I'm saying is you've got to start early on and providing examples, offering some of these programs from, you know, successful women who are already in STEAM, and having them come back and have some experiments or some field trips to their location. But it's about exposure in setting expectations about being in that workforce. But also we have to do better in terms of that workforce deserving equal pay and equal opportunity and equal treatment as well. And that they should not be demanding anything less. But yeah, being a part of that STEAM field, and if we can increase the women, that's exactly what we need to do.
Well, this conversation is really inspiring. I want to thank you, Danita, and I'd like to turn things back over to Judge Rob for, are you asking questions from the group now? Is that time for that? And I believe Michelle.
Of course, yes, thank you.
With that. Okay, so questions from the group, questions, ideas, thoughts, etc.
I do have a question, if you can hear me. My name is Mary Ann Mancon with the McLean County Health Department. You know, I'm thinking about the future of schools because I believe years and years ago when we first started school, we had summer off because people had to farm and had to help farm with their families. But that just isn't the way things are now. And I even live in a farming community. We're all really in a big agriculture community here ourselves. But it's not really necessary by today's standards for kids to have the whole summer off. Do you see us going forward having our kids having year-round school with maybe 2 or 3 big breaks in between?
Yeah, we were kind of talked on that a little bit. I go back and forth with it, but you're absolutely right. There was that time to for planning, and then there was time for harvesting. You know, they did account into that. There are some schools I know in Ohio, they take time off for deer season and hunting, because when I lived in Southeast Ohio, I live in Appalachia, and I lived in West Virginia. And so that was a shock to me. It was like, okay, no, we're going to be off next week because it's deer season. So we got to open up. And I understood it because that's how they survived. That's how they gained their food for the winter. You know, I think, again, it takes a lot of investment. You know, I mentioned earlier, there are some schools that don't even have air conditioning. So those classrooms are going to be extremely hot. And it might take some time in terms of having enough adequate money to have those startup costs. But I think there are some benefits for sure to having year-round school, but you got to make sure that you have adequate breaks. You're going to have the investment into the facilities and the infrastructure. And you got to figure out a way we already got to figure out a way to increase the pay for our teachers. We already got to do that for sure. But you're going to have to severely increase it some more and look at the resources if you're going to go to that 12-year or 12-month schedule. But I know it's being heavily debated.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that too. And I'm from Ohio myself too. I'm from Akron. So my niece went to Kent. So yeah, I know what you mean about deer season. My family's in Southeastern Ohio too. So yeah, it's a big deal.
I'm from Kent, so we're neighbors. I'm from Kent too, so.
I have a question. I think in one of our preparation meetings, Danita, you talked about the 3,200 student workers that you manage and supervise as part of your role as Chancellor, Vice Chancellor. And I think you talked about providing support to a lot of the women employees during this whole process, but can you talk about how your role, you certainly look to, I'm sure, as a mentor, as someone, as a woman who has, been very successful, but have you engaged in any programs or one-on-ones with these? I assume the 3,200, at least 1,500, probably more are women, but are you nurturing them as they engage in maybe their first work experiences while they're at school?
We have some programs that we certainly offer through our Women's Resource Center, but then each individual unit has some special, gatherings, trainings, if you will, for their individual student employees. But we offer something for all of them called Wellness Wednesdays. And during Wellness Wednesdays, we have topics. It's just for an hour and they are recorded, but it's a topic that focuses on one aspect of the wellness wheel. So we had Zumba class, we had yoga, we had mindfulness exercises, we had financial savvy workshops, we had cooking demonstrations, we had, some relaxation techniques, all of those things once a week on Wednesdays to focus on their wellness and support. And really just having these conversations. And I know on our women's resources, we have, they have workshops every other week on Mondays that really focus on the needs of women and how they are getting through. But yes, I join all of those.
Hi, I'm Rachel Carpenter. I'm the education manager at the Children's Discovery Museum. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for bringing up the fact that STEAM education needs to happen even in preschool. This is something that the Children's Museum has been advocating for years. And when we look at research, most of the early childhood research starts at first grade. It doesn't look at the kindergarten and preschool ages. And so we really advocate for that. Women to Women helps support us in our work in doing that. And so thank you. Please keep telling people that we need to do this.
Yes, you're absolutely welcome. I mean, even with the daycare that I send my daughter to, they focus on science. They were doing a whole segment on water and steam and what's frozen water and makes an ice and looking at soil composition. And I'm like, yes. And she's 2 and she's loving it. And this is why we have to start this educational process sooner. We cannot wait until it's later. So I will keep advocating for sure.
Hi, Doctor. This is Dr. Carla. Thank you guys so much for this presentation. It was well received. As you probably know, a lot of children are having suicidal ideation. How do we get to a space where we're comfortable talking about that topic, and specifically for all children, but especially for African Americans who have that stigma that if you had to go and see a counselor or a psychologist, there was something wrong with you. So how do we overcome that burden? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, unfortunately, suicide ideation and suicide completion did spike too, particularly around our high school students. And I know even on a college level, again, that's one of those topics where we do, as a society, need to be comfortable talking about. Some of us were brought up in this age where you kept your family problems in-house. You don't share any of those issues. You have to appear tough at all times. You have to appear strong at all times. And you can't let them see, you sweat or that you're down and you're out and depressed. But I think we have to start talking about feelings earlier, and it's okay to share those feelings. There are going to be times where you're going to be down and out. There are going to be times where you're depressed. So how do you deal with some of those coping mechanisms? Again, I look at some of the shows that my daughter watches, like Blue's Clues, and they're already addressing feelings. Again, she's 2, and that's what we need to do. But we also you know, there have been a lot of programs, you know, even prior to COVID, where you're going into a lot of these faith-based institutions, particularly in the Black churches. You know, we don't always talk about mental health and the impacts on ourselves and families, and helping people understand that, yes, you use your faith, you've got your prayer. A lot of times people, oh, you just need to go talk to the pastor. Okay, yes, you can do that too. But sometimes you need actual professional help to help work through some of these issues. And we've got to start removing that stigma early on. We also have to start putting those resources into the school systems too. They don't have enough school counselors and support in the schools. I mean, there might be one person that is shared by multiple schools. Or, you know, it's very tough and difficult to even get appointments scheduled. You know, it's one of the complaints on our own college campus. People say, yeah, guys, we can never get into the counseling center, or you can never, you know, find appointments in the community. So again, we need to start earlier with our conversations, with not just the students, but with our parents and families, to not be in denial. And it's okay. You know, if we need to start teaching people how to have these conversations, because people don't know how to have the conversations. So they kind of steer away from it. But we have to start, you know, addressing that, you know, you got one life, and, you know, you're going to have some rejection, you're going to have some failure, but you can turn a lot of those setbacks into comebacks, and just be open with it, because right now it's not, but it's definitely critical and crucial that we start to hammer home mental health and support early.
I like that advice, turning our setbacks into comebacks and continuing to have these discussions. You know, one area, if I could also add, in the realm of policy and the help we need from our legislators and other officials, is many times our insurance coverage is so limited when it comes to mental health resources. Some insurance coverages only allow for 10 visits to a mental health provider before someone has to pay out of pocket, which gets really expensive. So the more we can push for a mental health parity, so that because if we have some serious concerns, and particularly around suicidal ideations, that's not going away in 10 sessions. It's not, that's just scratching the surface. So the more we can have our decision makers see that those are important forms of healthcare that we absolutely need, and we have to insist on that. Other questions? Thank you. This is some great dialogue. I see a comment as other questions come in. Thank you for stressing the need for professional mental health. It is so critical for so many people. We need to encourage our family and friends, more tough conversations. Someone also mentioned, I really appreciate including the positive outcomes during COVID. I think it's really important for us to focus on the positive as we move post-COVID life. And that's really what we wanted this session to be about. Not to deny the difficulties, but how we can rely on our resilience, our creative thinking to move forward. Do we have other questions?
Dr. Houston, how you doing?
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for hosting this panel discussion. I am just so excited about the conversation and the dialogue. And I am so pleased that it is recorded. Our legislators, our leaders need to see and hear this conversation today. And I believe that they will be more enlightened, you know, as to the challenges that women and children face. we do know that because of COVID has uncovered a lot of disparities and discrimination and racism. But it has always been there. And so now we out in front with it where we can talk about it and hopefully come up with ways in which we can eliminate it or reduce it. I am a realist, but I think that we need to continue to have these conversations, but we also need to have, okay, what's next? You know, so what's next? You know, we've learned a lot today. You know, do we reach out to our legislatures? Do we reach out to our leadership? How do we engage our schools? How do we ensure that our young people are getting the help and the support that they need? Because we need them to be whole. You know, we need them to feel that they are part of and that they are the solution. You know, they do have the answers and that we're listening, you know. So how do we get to the point that everybody feels as though that, you know, they have something to give? You know, how do we engage people so that nobody's left behind? You know, and I know, you know, funding is scarce right now. You know, we know that the ideas of what used to be now has a totally different look of what is. You know, so, you know, we talk about this hybrid thing. We're going to take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, you know, but we need to take what worked and learn for what hasn't. So get to my question is, it's not necessarily a question, but is we got to get through this thing. And how do we get through this thing whereas we are all better because of it?
Doris, I could comment and might conclude us in a way. I think we're all concerned about that. And I think every one of us, what I was really struck by today was you have to create your village. And a lot of us have had a network of women over the years from church, from work, from whatever. And we can use the resources that we have and groups such as Women to Women. All we can do is what we can do. But you know what? We can do a little more than we have been doing. And a conversation like this, I think, inspires us. And the 10th anniversary of Women to Women inspires us. And we will take it forward. And people like Danita and Doris talking to us and expanding our vision and our knowledge. It's been great.
But I would definitely add to that. You're exactly right. You have to put some action into it. And so yes, contacting your state legislators, your local representatives about some of these issues. There is an initiative that we kicked off here in the Champaign-Urbana area called our Community Call to Action. And it is a community. When I say community, I mean university and our local community members are involved in this process, where we are looking at several focus areas. One is including health and wellness. The other one is economic development. We're looking at inclusive education. We're looking at workforce development. We're looking at community relations. We're looking at accessible technology, and woven in there is the community safety. And we have had, there are co-leads to each one of those focus areas. So we have 2 campus leaders and we have 2 community leaders that can lead that area with some expertise, but really bring together the voices of everybody so that we can begin to set a clear vision, some key priorities about how do we heal the community, how do we move the community forward, looking at, making sure that every voice is definitely heard. What are some of the issues that we've got to address? We know that there is a plethora of issues. And so looking at those intentional ways to move our community forward by addressing all of those issues and breaking it down and having some short-term, some gains, some wins, but also some long-term gains, because we know that to have any type of movement and change, it's not going to happen overnight. So we know if we're going to have sustainable, impactful change, it's going to take multiple years to work through it, but to really put together some proposals, some action plans that we can be invested in and start making the change and having some ownership of our community to make that change. So I would encourage other communities to kind of, if they haven't started something like that, to definitely to look into that public engagement and partnership.
Thank you, Danita. Thank you, Pat Grove, for your words. And want to acknowledge Linda Foster, who asked that previous question, our president of our local NAACP.
Thank you.
Okay, did we have an announcement from Judge Rob before we close? Boy, it is. We're rounding out. It's our time is nearing an end already. So I'll turn over to you, Judge Rob.
Thank you, and thank you again, Dr. Brown Young and Dr. Doris Houston, for this really engaging conversation. Pat said what I was planning to say, which is great, but I guess those of you who are longstanding members of Women to Women, we are going to have a 10th anniversary celebration later in the summer. Those of you who have joined us today, we are always seeking to expand our membership and participation of women in our organization. So please, you'll be receiving information about this later in the spring. So please come back. We're going to have a celebration in later this summer. And I think that Dr. Houston, where'd you go on my screen? I lost you, but you're here somewhere, I know, because she is, there she is. She has found, I think, a very inspirational ending for this gathering today. And I'm going to pass it back to Dr. Houston to close.
Thank you. So for those of you who can stay on just another minute or so, Michelle is going to help us. This is what I'd say is our gift to you. It's a video that is, when I found it, I was so inspired, and it's something for us to think about and just a way to honor ourselves. So we'll play this short, very short musical video, and we'll end from there.
Broken down and tired of living life on a merry-go-round, and you can't find a fighter, but I see it in you, so we're gonna walk it out. Move mountains, we gonna walk it out. Move mountains. And our eyes like the day, our eyes unafraid, our eyes up, and I do it 1,000 times again for you. Silence isn't quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe. And I know you feel like dying, but I promise we'll take the world to its feet. Move mountains, bring it to its feet. Move mountains up, and I rise up. I rise like the day. I rise up. I rise unafraid. I rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you. That we have each other, and for that we have each other, and we will rise, we will rise, we'll rise up. I'll rise up, I like the waves, I'll rise up. In spite of the ache, I will rise 1,000 times again. And we'll rise up. I like the waves. We'll rise up. In spite of the ache, we'll rise up. And we'll do it 1,000 times again. We'll rise up. Oh, we can rise. Thank you.
And we'd like to thank you. Boy, wasn't that inspiring? Let's give ourselves a hand. Let's rise up together. And that ends our program. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Danita. We really appreciate your presence with us today.